In the world of esports, there is an endless battle between two different control methods for the world stage: keyboard and controller. This balance varies from game to game and largely depends on the nature of the game and how its inputs affect gameplay. On one end you have strategy games, which favour keyboard massively as they depend on numerous different keys and inputs. On the other you have fighting games, which are dominated by controllers. They require more nuanced and precise movements and can trace their lineage back to the earliest of consoles. Rocket League finds itself somewhere in the middle of this line. Although built for controller, the keyboard certainly isn't a pushover and has carved itself a small niche within the professional side of Rocket League, and in ways not seen in any other game. It would be wrong to deny that the control method doesn't exactly live in the limelight, however, and it's rarely seen at LAN events, for example. But why is this the case? Why is it even seen at all? And what about the control method prevents it from being a meta choice? Rocket League released on Steam in the middle of 2015. Being a PC title as well meant that the game really had to accommodate keyboard controls to some extent. The controls are a little strange to get used to, but Rocket League being a wholly unique experience means that both controller and keyboard players are equally confused to start with. The game is clearly geared toward controller play in the long run. A clear indicator of that being the archaic key layout, which portrays typical practices like space being jump. Those who have never played Rocket League on keyboard and mouse before might be surprised by how mechanically competent someone on that format can be. You won't see that from me, but it's still true. They can often go unnoticed in regular games without scrutinous observation. As far as I'm aware, there isn't a mechanic currently in game that isn't at least possible on keyboard as well. The main difference between keyboard and controller in Rocket League is to do with car precision. Since one of the main mechanics of the game, dodging, is controlled via WASD, keyboard players are stuck with only 8 possible directions, 4 buttons and 4 diagonals. This means that keyboard players have to be much more deliberate in their shooting, relying much more on setup angles and timing in order to achieve the same results. These buttons also lack the analog sensitivity and dead zones possible with the thumbstick, meaning that any directional movement is either all or nothing, which means that precision under keyboard relies quite heavily on quick tapping and can be prone to over or undershooting. It wouldn't be right to talk about keyboard and mouse without bringing up some of the good parts of using the control method. It is a very popular choice for the freestyle scene, where the lack of nuance in the controls ironically makes it really helpful in repeating complicated inputs without fault. Since the inputs are often all or nothing, it's actually quite difficult to do anything by accident, mistakes oftentimes coming from other areas of a player's experience, which means that if you know what you're doing, it can be quite a significant advantage in reliably performing set moves. While not necessarily accurate, keyboard inputs are fast and independent of each other, which means that players can make very quick micro adjustments, which are quite prevalent in the freestyle scene, and have their uses generally in advanced aerial plays. While keyboard and controller do have their mechanical differences, there really isn't anything significant in that domain that would prevent a keyboard player from being able to reach the professional level. While high mechanical skill is very important to becoming a pro, consistency and decision making often make up the backbone of the best teams. Of the 807 players to have made over $500 in prize pool winnings, 54 of them are keyboard players, or about 1 in every 15, which isn't much, but it's far from zero. Since we don't really have any reliable data on player demographics outside of ranks, we can only make a modest assumption that at least 5% of the people you meet at any rank are keyboard players, potentially more. Despite glaring mechanical differences, it's only part of the story as to why keyboard isn't prevalent. A lot of the reasons stem from more social factors that are built up from the game's launch. Keyboard right from the get-go is considered a non-standard choice when it comes to car games. It's heavily implied that they should be experienced with a controller, owing to the strengths of the medium for that genre of game. Rocket League fundamentally is no different. Despite the deviations that the game takes away from your standard racer, it's still at its core a car game. Including the game's popularity on controller-only consoles, keyboard usage would make up a very tiny proportion of the player base, regardless of any mechanical benefits. Another issue is that improving as a keyboard player has some serious roadblocks on that journey. Oftentimes mechanical guides are aimed towards controller players players, and keyboard variants are harder to come across, likely due to there being less overall keyboard players and creators. You're also much less likely to have peers that can give relevant mechanical advice, unlike controller players who have a much broader network, which means that for players looking at continuous improvement from guides and coaching, it's hard to justify sticking with the control method. Since playing on keyboard is a minority choice, it is much easier to pin stagnation and skill plateaus on it, which can be seen by the endless Reddit posts of players considering a swap after hitting a wall. Regardless of the true cause, you wouldn't really see this with a controller user, as any plateau would be assumed to be caused by some other factor. This often means that keyboard players become increasingly uncommon as you climb the ranks, often to switching control methods. Overall, the esports scene is driven by established norms, and playing on keyboard is not one of them in this game. Anyone who chooses this path will be fighting the tide, and it's not really a hill worth dying on. Would the scene be more interesting if there was more of a balance between keyboard and controller? It's hard to say, but it'd always be cool to see the odd keyboard pro pop up every now and then. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel. Be sure to check out the full non-meta playlist here, and I'll see you guys in the next video.